Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with sirens or shouting. Sometimes, it walks silently into the room and waits for arrogance to expose itself. The courthouse in Richmond, Virginia had witnessed thousands of hearings over the decades. Its marble floors reflected the pale glow of overhead lights, while the towering columns outside stood like silent guardians of a justice system that promised equality to everyone who entered. Lawyers hurried through security carrying thick folders. Clerks whispered over stacks of paperwork. Families waited nervously on polished wooden benches, hoping that today would finally bring answers. On the surface, it looked like any ordinary Tuesday morning. But in less than 10 minutes, everyone inside that courthouse would witness a moment they would never forget. Naomi Brooks stepped through the courthouse entrance with quiet confidence. At 38, she carried herself with the calm composure of someone who had long learned that dignity was often tested before it was recognized. She wore a simple navy blue dress beneath a light gray blazer, nothing extravagant, nothing designed to draw attention. Her natural curls rested neatly over one shoulder, and a leather portfolio remained tucked beneath her arm. She acknowledged the security officers with a polite smile before placing her belongings into the scanner. Most of them barely looked up. One man did. Officer Ethan Walker. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the unmistakable confidence of someone who believed his badge placed him above everyone else. Walker leaned casually against the security checkpoint. Years of wearing the uniform had filled him with an authority that often drifted beyond professionalism and into arrogance. Around the courthouse, people knew him as someone who rarely questioned his own judgment. He noticed Naomi immediately, not because she had done anything unusual, but because, in his mind, she looked like someone who didn't belong. His eyes followed her as she collected her portfolio. "Hold it." The single word echoed louder than it needed to. Several conversations nearby faded. Naomi stopped and turned politely. "Is something wrong, officer?" Walker slowly walked toward her, his expression hardening. "I need to search your bag again." She looked briefly toward the scanner where another deputy had already finished inspecting it only seconds earlier. "It has already been cleared. I didn't ask what happened before." His voice grew sharper. "I said I'm checking it again." The lobby became noticeably quieter. A young attorney waiting near the elevators glanced over. Two jurors exchanged uncertain looks. No one spoke. Naomi offered the portfolio without resistance. Walker opened every compartment with exaggerated force, scattering documents across the inspection table as though searching for evidence of something he himself could not define. He found nothing. Still, he wasn't finished. "You people always seem to think courthouse rules don't apply to you." The sentence landed heavily in the silence. Several people lowered their eyes. Others pretended to check their phones. No one challenged him. Naomi slowly gathered her papers without raising her voice. "I came here because I was instructed to appear." Walker gave a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you did." He stepped closer. "So tell me." His eyes scanned her from head to toe. "Which courtroom are you pretending to belong in today?" A faint murmur rippled through the lobby. Someone looked uncomfortable. Another quietly walked away. Yet no one intervened. Naomi remained perfectly still. Her breathing never changed. Her expression never hardened. Instead, she looked directly into Walker's eyes with a calmness that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. For a brief second, something about her composure unsettled him. But pride quickly buried the feeling. He reached for her visitor badge. "This pass doesn't mean you get to wander wherever you want." Before Naomi could answer, Walker unclipped the badge from her blazer with unnecessary force and held it up between two fingers. "If I were you," he smirked, "I'd leave before you embarrass yourself any further." The words echoed through the courthouse lobby. A clerk standing behind the reception desk quietly froze. She recognized the name printed on the visitor authorization lying among Naomi's scattered papers. "Brooks." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She instinctively reached for the courthouse phone, then hesitated. Across the hallway, an older bailiff glanced toward the entrance, then immediately checked the large clock mounted above the courtroom doors. 9:02 a.m. His face changed, almost as if he were waiting for someone. Naomi noticed neither reaction. Or perhaps, she noticed everything. She simply chose not to respond. Because sometimes the loudest victory begins with complete silence. And somewhere beyond the heavy oak doors leading deeper into the courthouse, Footsteps were drawing closer, steady, deliberate, and about to change everything Walker believed he controlled. The silence that settled over the courthouse lobby felt heavier than the marble walls surrounding it. It wasn't the kind of silence born from peace. It was the silence of people who had seen something wrong and quietly decided it wasn't their place to stop it. Officer Ethan Walker seemed to feed on that silence. He tossed Naomi Brooks' visitor badge onto the inspection counter as though it were worthless. The laminated card slid across the polished surface before stopping beside the leather portfolio he had already searched twice. "Pick it up," he said with a smirk. "If you're still allowed to be here." A few nervous chuckles escaped from somewhere behind the security line. Naomi slowly bent down, gathered her papers one by one, and placed them neatly back into the folder. Not once did her hands tremble. Not once did she raise her voice. Her composure irritated Walker even more. Most people argued. Some cried. Others begged. She did none of those things. Instead, she looked at him with the quiet confidence of someone carrying a truth far larger than the moment unfolding around her. "Officer," she said gently, "I'd simply like to proceed to courtroom 3. Walker folded his arms. "I'll decide where you proceed." His words echoed beneath the high ceiling. Across the lobby, attorneys stopped their conversations. A bailiff standing near the courtroom entrance frowned but remained still. Even the metal detector seemed unusually loud as another visitor passed through. Nobody wanted to interfere. The courthouse had developed an unspoken habit over the years. When Officer Walker was involved, people watched, then looked away. Naomi adjusted the strap of her portfolio and quietly waited. She glanced toward the hallway leading deeper into the courthouse. A large oak door stood closed at the far end. Above it, an antique clock ticked with relentless precision. 9:04. Only 2 minutes had passed. Yet somehow the atmosphere had changed. Behind the reception desk, court clerk Melissa Carter stared at the authorization sheet still lying on the counter. Her eyes stopped on a single line. Visitor name, Naomi Brooks. The surname lingered in her thoughts. Brooks. She had heard it countless times. Not because it was unusual, because everyone working inside the courthouse knew that name. Melissa instinctively reached toward the courthouse telephone before pulling her hand back. Maybe she was mistaken. Meanwhile, Walker took another slow step toward Naomi. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "People like you always think knowing the right words gets you special treatment." Naomi answered with remarkable calm. "I'm not asking for special treatment." "Then what are you asking for?" "The same respect every citizen deserves." The sentence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted. Yet somehow it settled over the room with greater force than any argument could have. Walker laughed. "Respect is earned." Naomi met his eyes without hesitation. "So is authority." For the first time that morning, Walker's smile faltered. Only for a heartbeat. Then it returned, sharper than before. He pointed toward the exit doors. "I think your business here is finished." Several people exchanged uneasy glances. An elderly attorney quietly shook his head. A young deputy shifted uncomfortably beside the security scanner. Still, no one moved. Then, from somewhere beyond the heavy courthouse doors, came the unmistakable sound of polished shoes striking marble floors in slow, deliberate rhythm. 1, 2, 3. The footsteps carried the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce his arrival. Melissa Carter looked toward the hallway and felt her heartbeat quicken. The older bailiff immediately straightened his uniform. 2 deputies instinctively stood taller. They hadn't seen who was coming, but somehow, they already knew. Imagine standing in a room full of people, knowing every eye is on you, yet realizing that not a single voice is willing to stand beside you. Sometimes injustice doesn't survive because it is powerful. It survives because good people convince themselves that silence is safer. The measured footsteps continued down the marble hallway. Each one echoed through the courthouse like the steady ticking of a clock counting toward an unavoidable moment. Officer Ethan Walker heard them too. He glanced briefly toward the corridor before dismissing the sound with another arrogant smile. His attention returned to Naomi. "You still haven't answered my question." Naomi looked at him calmly. "Which one?" Walker stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "What makes you think you belong here?" The words lingered in the air. Several people shifted uncomfortably. A young law student waiting for jury selection lowered his eyes. An elderly woman clasped her purse tighter. No one interrupted. Naomi answered softly, "Because this courthouse belongs to every citizen." Walker laughed louder this time. "You really believe that?" "I do." His expression darkened. "That's your first mistake." Without warning, he picked up her leather portfolio and flipped it upside down. Case notes, legal documents, a notebook, everything scattered across the polished marble floor. Gasps spread through the lobby. Pens rolled beneath waiting benches. Loose papers drifted across the hallway like fallen leaves. Naomi stared at the documents for a brief second. Then she slowly knelt down. One page at a time. She gathered every paper with patient, deliberate movements. She refused to rush. She refused to panic. Most surprising of all, she refused to hate him. Walker watched her with visible satisfaction. "Now that's more like it." He folded his arms. "Know your place." No one noticed the quiet anger building inside Melissa Carter. Behind the reception desk, her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell Officer Walker exactly who Naomi Brooks was. But years of working inside the courthouse had taught her another lesson. Never interfere before the right moment. Across the hallway, the older bailiff checked his watch again. 9:06. He took one slow breath. Then another. Almost as if he knew the next 60 seconds would change everything. Naomi finished collecting the final sheet of paper. She stood, carefully straightened the stack, and brushed invisible dust from the cover. Walker tilted his head. "I've met plenty of people who thought staying calm made them look strong." Naomi looked directly into his eyes. "Remaining calm keeps other people from becoming who they're trying to make me become." For the first time, there was no immediate reply. Walker blinked. Something about those words unsettled him. Not because he agreed. Because he couldn't provoke the reaction he wanted. His pride demanded one final attempt. He reached toward Naomi again, placing a firm hand against her shoulder. "You know what? I think I'll escort you out myself." The pressure of his hand drew immediate attention. Several attorneys stopped walking. A deputy near the security station instinctively took one step forward before freezing. Even the conversations in the hallway disappeared. The courthouse had become completely silent. Then, a deep voice echoed from beyond the oak doors. "Officer Walker." The single sentence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every deputy in the hallway immediately straightened. The older bailiff stood at full attention. Melissa Carter slowly closed her eyes. She recognized that voice instantly, and judging by the sudden change in Walker's face, so did he. There is a strange kind of power that belongs only to people who never need to raise their voices. When they speak, the room doesn't become louder. It becomes quieter. Officer Ethan Walker slowly removed his hand from Naomi Brooks' shoulder. The confidence that had filled his face only seconds earlier began to crack. He turned toward the hallway. Every pair of eyes followed. The footsteps stopped just beyond the oak doorway. For one long heartbeat, no one appeared. The silence itself became unbearable. Then a tall man stepped into view. He wore a charcoal suit instead of a police uniform. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his expression carried the calm discipline of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions. There was nothing dramatic about his entrance. No flashing lights. No raised voice. No announcement. Yet the reaction around the courthouse was immediate. Deputies standing near the security checkpoint instinctively straightened. The older bailiff stood at full attention. Even the attorneys who had been pretending not to notice suddenly stopped whispering. Walker recognized the man instantly. His heartbeat quickened. Chief Daniel Brooks, the city's chief of police. Walker swallowed. What are you doing here, Chief?" Daniel Brooks didn't answer immediately. His steady gaze swept across the lobby. The scattered tension, the frightened faces, the loose papers still resting near Naomi's feet. Finally, his eyes settled on Officer Walker. What happened here? The question was simple. There was no anger behind it. Only expectation. Walker cleared his throat. "Routine security procedure, sir." Daniel looked at the inspection table, then at the papers Naomi was still holding, then back at Walker. "Routine." "Yes, sir." "You searched her belongings?" "Yes, sir." "More than once." Walker hesitated. "I believed it was necessary." Daniel nodded slowly. The movement revealed nothing. No approval. No disagreement. Just quiet observation. He walked several steps closer until he stood beside Naomi. Neither of them spoke. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other. Walker expected an introduction. Instead, Daniel asked softly, "Are you all right?" Naomi offered the smallest smile. I'm fine. Nothing more. No accusation. No complaint. No attempt to use the chief's presence as a weapon. Walker frowned. Something about their interaction felt unusual, comfortable, natural, almost effortless. Melissa Carter watched from behind the reception desk, barely breathing. She had waited years to witness a moment like this. Not because she wanted anyone humiliated, because she wanted the truth to reveal itself naturally. Daniel finally turned back toward Walker. Officer, sir, did you ask for identification? Yes. Did she cooperate? Yes. Did you find anything suspicious? No, sir. Daniel nodded again. And despite full cooperation, his eyes briefly moved toward the papers scattered across the marble floor. Her documents somehow ended up there. Walker searched desperately for an explanation. I was conducting a thorough inspection. The words sounded weaker than he intended. Daniel remained silent for several seconds. The entire courthouse seemed to hold its breath. Then he looked at Naomi once more. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. You've always been more patient than I am. Naomi smiled faintly. I've had good practice. Walker blinked. Always. The single word echoed inside his mind. His eyes moved from Naomi, back to Daniel, then to their matching wedding bands. The color slowly drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Around the lobby, people began noticing the rings as well. One whisper became two. Two became 10. Officer Walker suddenly realized the woman he had spent the last several minutes humiliating wasn't simply another courthouse visitor. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't powerless. She was Mrs. Naomi Brooks, the wife of the chief of police. And for the very first time that morning, Officer Ethan Walker understood that the worst part of his day had not happened yet. It was only beginning. Justice becomes most powerful when it refuses to become revenge. The easiest thing Daniel Brooks could have done that morning was defend his wife with his rank. Instead, he chose something far more difficult. He chose to let the law judge one of its own. The courthouse doors leading to courtroom 3 slowly opened. Judge Harold Whitman stepped into the lobby, accompanied by 2 court officers. His black robe moved gently as he surveyed the unusual gathering outside his courtroom. He immediately noticed the tension. Then he noticed the chief of police. Finally, he noticed Officer Ethan Walker. Chief Brooks, the judge said calmly. I understand there's been an incident. Daniel nodded. There has, Your Honor. Judge Whitman's eyes moved toward Naomi. Mrs. Brooks, were you harmed? Naomi answered with quiet honesty. No, Your Honor. Were you threatened? She paused. I was publicly humiliated. The simplicity of her answer seemed heavier than any accusation. The judge lowered his head for a brief moment. Then he turned toward Walker. Officer, do you dispute that statement? Walker felt every heartbeat pounding inside his chest. I was only performing my duties. Judge Whitman didn't react. That wasn't my question. Walker struggled to answer. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded once. Very well. He looked toward the security desk. Is this lobby covered by surveillance cameras? Melissa Carter answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Audio as well. Yes. The judge folded his hands behind his back. I want the complete recording preserved immediately. The request echoed through the hallway. No one moved at first. Then 2 deputies hurried toward the courthouse security office. Daniel remained completely silent. He had not requested an investigation. He had not demanded discipline. The process was unfolding exactly as it should. Judge Whitman continued. I also want written statements from every employee who witnessed this interaction. Several courthouse staff members exchanged nervous glances. For the first time that morning, silence would no longer protect anyone. It would require honesty. Walker suddenly realized the room had changed. Only minutes earlier, people had looked away. Now they were looking directly at him. Not with fear, with expectation. The young attorney who had watched from the elevator quietly stepped forward. I witnessed the entire exchange, Your Honor. An elderly woman raised her hand next. So did I. The older bailiff nodded. I'll provide a statement. Within seconds, more voices followed. I saw it. I heard everything. He searched her twice. She never argued. Walker felt his confidence collapse piece by piece. The silence that had protected him was gone. It had been replaced by witnesses. Judge Whitman waited until everyone became quiet again. Then he looked directly at Daniel Brooks. Chief, would you like to make a statement? Daniel answered without hesitation. No, Your Honor. The judge raised an eyebrow. Daniel continued, "My relationship to Mrs. Brooks is irrelevant." His voice remained steady. If Officer Walker violated department policy, he should answer for that. A brief pause followed. If he didn't, Daniel looked toward Walker. Then my title should not matter either. Those words settled over the courthouse like a final lesson. Naomi smiled gently. That was exactly why she had never called her husband. She had always trusted the system. She simply hoped the system would remember its own principles. Judge Whitman gave one final instruction. Until this matter is reviewed, Officer Ethan Walker is relieved of courthouse security duties effective immediately. No shouting followed. No dramatic confrontation. Only the unmistakable sound of a badge being slowly unclipped from a uniform. For Walker, it was the loudest sound he had ever heard. The strongest lesson a person can receive is not the one shouted in anger. It is the one delivered quietly, leaving no room to blame anyone but themselves. Officer Ethan Walker stood motionless as another deputy approached him. "Sir." The younger officer's voice was respectful but firm. "I'll need your courthouse access credentials." Walker stared at him in disbelief. For years, he had been the one giving instructions. Now he was the one receiving them. Slowly, almost mechanically, he unclipped the electronic access card from his belt and handed it over. The deputy accepted it without satisfaction, without judgment, only duty. Judge Whitman observed the exchange before speaking again. "Officer Walker, you are not under arrest." Walker looked up hopefully. "But you are now the subject of an official administrative investigation." The hope disappeared almost instantly. "This review will determine whether your conduct violated department policy, courthouse regulations, and the professional standards expected of every sworn officer." The judge's words were calm. There was no anger, no humiliation, only accountability. Daniel Brooks remained beside Naomi, saying nothing. His silence carried its own message. Justice did not need applause. It only needed honesty. Melissa Carter watched Naomi with admiration. Most people in her position would have demanded an apology. Some would have demanded punishment. Naomi asked for neither. She simply waited. The young attorney who had volunteered to testify stepped closer. "I'd like my statement to reflect something else." Judge Whitman nodded. "Go ahead." When Officer Walker emptied her portfolio, he glanced toward Naomi. She never once insulted him. Another witness spoke. She thanked the bailiff after he helped her. An elderly woman added quietly. She treated everyone with respect, even the man who embarrassed her. Each statement painted the same picture, not of perfection, but of dignity. Walker lowered his eyes. For the first time that morning, he replayed the encounter without the pride that had clouded his judgment. He remembered every sarcastic remark, every unnecessary command, every assumption he had made before learning a single fact about the woman standing in front of him. The realization settled heavily inside him. If Daniel Brooks had never entered the courthouse, if Naomi had simply been another citizen, everything he had done would likely have gone unquestioned. That thought disturbed him more than anything else. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Officer Walker." Walker looked up slowly. "I have one question." "Yes, Chief." Daniel's expression revealed neither anger nor triumph. "If my wife had not been married to me," he paused, "would you have treated her any differently?" The lobby became perfectly still. Walker searched for an answer. He wanted to say no. He wanted to defend himself. But the faces surrounding him made dishonesty impossible. The witnesses, the judge, his fellow deputies, and Naomi herself. He looked at the floor. Then, almost in a whisper, he answered, "I don't know." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's the answer you need to think about." No lecture followed. No public humiliation. Because Daniel understood something every great leader eventually learns. People rarely change because they are embarrassed. They change when they are forced to confront the truth about themselves. Walker closed his eyes for a brief moment. The badge he had worn for years had always represented authority. Now it represented responsibility. And for the first time since putting on that uniform, he understood that failing to honor one meant losing the right to claim the other. As the courtroom doors opened for the morning session, everyone present realized they had witnessed something far greater than the exposure of one officer's misconduct. They had witnessed the law choosing integrity over power. People often believe justice is measured by the punishment someone receives. But real justice is measured by the standard it leaves behind for everyone who comes after. The courthouse slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Lawyers disappeared into courtrooms. Clerks resumed their work. The echo of hurried footsteps replaced the tense silence that had filled the lobby only minutes earlier. Yet something fundamental had changed. Officer Ethan Walker stood quietly near the security station, no longer wearing the authority he had once displayed so confidently. His access credentials were gone. His badge rested inside an evidence envelope that would remain sealed until the internal review was complete. No one mocked him. No one celebrated. The absence of triumph somehow made the moment even more powerful. Judge Harold Whitman prepared to enter courtroom 3, but stopped beside Naomi Brooks before stepping inside. "Mrs. Brooks." She turned toward him. "I appreciate the way you conducted yourself today." Naomi smiled politely. "I appreciate that the court chose to hear the truth." The judge nodded. "That's exactly what courts are supposed to do." Daniel Brooks listened quietly beside her. He looked toward the deputies returning to their posts. Some of them avoided his eyes. Others stood a little straighter than before. Not because the chief was watching, because they understood they represented something larger than themselves. Daniel addressed them calmly. "I want everyone here to remember something." The hallway became silent again. "This morning was never about proving who my wife is." His eyes moved across every uniform in the lobby. "It was about proving who we are." No one spoke. "When citizens enter this building," Daniel continued, "they should never have to wonder whether respect depends on their appearance, their name, or the people they know." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "The badge exists to remove fear." His voice softened, never to create it. Several deputies lowered their heads. The lesson wasn't directed only at Walker anymore. It belonged to everyone wearing a uniform. Naomi reached gently for Daniel's hand, not because she needed protection, simply because they understood one another without speaking. Melissa Carter watched them leave the security area together. She realized that throughout the entire morning, neither of them had asked for special treatment. Neither had demanded immediate punishment. Neither had attempted to use influence. They had trusted the process. And because they had trusted it, everyone else had been reminded why the process existed. As Daniel and Naomi approached the courtroom doors, Walker quietly spoke. "Mrs. Brooks." She stopped and turned. His voice was almost unrecognizable. "I'm sorry." The apology wasn't polished. It wasn't eloquent. It carried none of the confidence he had shown earlier. Only regret. Naomi studied him for a long moment. Then she answered softly, "I hope one day you'll treat the next person with the respect you should have shown me." Nothing more. She offered no lecture, no condemnation, because forgiveness did not erase accountability. It simply refused to let bitterness become the final chapter. Walker nodded slowly. "I will." Whether he was speaking to Naomi or making a promise to himself, no one could say. As the courtroom doors closed behind Daniel and Naomi, sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, stretching across the marble floor where scattered papers had rested only an hour before. The lobby looked exactly as it had that morning. Yet everyone standing there understood something invisible had changed. Justice had not merely corrected one man's actions. It had reminded an entire courthouse what justice was supposed to look like.